First up, we have Robin's Evade Decoy ability. Robin evades and creates a decoy that attracts all enemies. It disappears once hit and lasts 15 seconds. If you notice, this ability is on the top row. What that means is it only costs 1 momentum point to be able to use it. Everything on the top row costs 1 point, while everything on the bottom row costs 2. You gain access to this ability right at the beginning of the game. When you get to the Belfry for the first time, you'll be asked to unlock Perfect Evade, which lets you build up momentum. And now that you're able to do that, the game gives you this ability to start. So all you're going to have to do to get this one is progress through the beginning of the tutorial. This ability's main purpose is to distract enemies. Once activated, your enemies should shift their focus to it rather than you. This even does the same thing with long-range attacks, which keeps you from getting shot. That said, after it's hit, it goes away. This ability works great to take the focus off of Robin so he can mount attacks on distracted enemies, or even escape. Unfortunately, at first it doesn't do any damage, but Robin has 2 skills you can get to change that. The first is Elemental Decoy. When attacked, Robin's decoy inflicts a large amount of elemental effect damage on the attacking enemy. If you didn't know, Robin's a very elementally driven character. These 2 skills really lean into Robin's strong elemental abilities. This is great because each faction has elements they're either strong or weak against. So if you know who you're planning on fighting, you can choose the element that they're weak against to really maximize your damage. This first skill really allows Robin's decoy to start dealing a significant amount of damage. Once it's attacked, it'll blow up in their faces, and whatever element you have attached to your melee weapon will be what affects your enemy. And again, because each enemy is weak against one of the elements, you can choose your loadout accordingly so the decoy causes the most amount of damage possible. On top of just being a distraction, this ability, when timed right, can be a pretty effective counter. When you see the attack coming, not only will this get you out of the way, but it'll interrupt their attacks and deal damage in return. The only disadvantage with this one is if your decoy gets attacked by a range attack. Because the decoy's purpose is to draw the enemy's attack, a long-ranged enemy will take it out, and when this happens, if there's nobody around to take the explosion damage, this attack will just miss. Second, Robin has the Exploding Decoy skill. Robin's decoy explodes, leaving behind elemental residue that deals elemental effect damage to any enemy that walks into it. This is basically an add-on to Robin's elemental decoy ability. After it explodes, it leaves traces of your melee element in a small circle that continues to deal damage. This one deals a pretty small amount of elemental damage on your enemy, but it's passive damage, and this is damage that will continue for a short time after your decoy is destroyed. All you have to do is get the enemy to walk over this area where the decoy exploded, and they should be affected. So the bottom line with this one is it's a great distraction at first, but as you progress and boost this with your skill tree, it can cause a sizable amount of damage both with the initial explosion and the small amount of damage over time. However, for the damage from the exploding decoy to come into effect, it'll have to be attacked by a melee attack. Next up is the bow spin. Robin rapidly spins his bow staff, deflecting incoming projectiles and inflicting damage on nearby enemies. This will likely be the second ability that you unlock. All you have to do is progress through the story until you hit case 1.4, Blackgate Blues. After you break into Blackgate and talk to Harley, you'll have to make your way down to the archives. On the way, you'll get to go through another tutorial mission. This one's for piercing abilities. Piercing abilities are the ones that can interrupt enemies' red attacks. Every hero has one, and Robin's first is Bowspin. When you get to this point, you'll have to face the mob faction boss. Whenever you see your hands turn red, go ahead and use this attack, and you should pass this tutorial no problem. This move doesn't do a ton of damage per hit, but because it deals so many hits, the damage really adds up by the time the attack's over. However, you have to make sure you're hitting the same enemy to maximize this damage. This one does not have 360 degrees of attack, and it does not lock on to anybody in particular. So it's pretty easy to start accidentally missing your target enemy, and if you only get this move to hit once or twice, you won't be dealing a ton of damage. Like we talked about before, this move has a piercing ability, which means it can be used to interrupt enemy armor attacks when you see them coming. So if you're in a pinch and you see those red hands coming, use this and it'll take care of it. As discussed, Robin relies heavily on elemental damage, and this attack is no different. Depending on what element you have attached to your main melee weapon, this will transfer that damage to whoever gets sucked up in your attack. Again, pair this with the proper enemy to really maximize your damage. Finally, it works really well on those hard-to-hit enemies. Some enemies, like Feral Talons or Drone Specialists, are really tough to hit and usually require a heavy battering attack. Because this attack still has a fairly wide range to it, it can suck up these enemies, neutralizing their ability to dodge. Long story short, this is a pretty powerful attack that can work on multiple enemies and interrupt enemy armor attacks. Next up is Robin's Warp Hit Shot. After shooting an enemy, Robin warps to them and ambushes them with a heavy melee attack. To unlock this, you'll have to complete the Guard Breaker challenge. For this one, you'll have to take out 5 of the Freak Bulldozers, who are the mini-boss for the Freak faction. This attack is really great to close the distance on enemies while dealing a solid amount of damage. However, it is a single enemy attack, so you're going to have to pay close attention to who you're targeting. Attacks like these I tend to use mostly on faction bosses, or other enemies that take a lot of damage and are difficult to take down. This attack also has a guard break aspect to it, so specifically with the faction bosses, this attack will break through their defenses. As always with Robin, this attack is also influenced by whatever elemental effect you have attached to your ranged weapon, so if used correctly, this attack can deal a ton of damage to the right enemy. Long story short, this is a really great attack that deals a solid amount of damage to an enemy, can close a lot of distance very quickly, and is highly influenced by Robin's elemental abilities, giving you an edge on certain factions depending on what you pick. Next up is Robin's Cloak ability. Robin cloaks himself, making him undetectable to enemies and security systems. It can also be activated while hanging or perching, and it lasts 10 seconds. You unlock this one by completing the Shadow Perch challenge, where you have to clear out 2 owl nests. So nothing too crazy to get this, however it does not become available until after mission 3.1. Owl's nests are marked by this symbol, and each one will be behind these green secret passageways and typically will have 2 waves of enemies. This ability does not deal any damage, it is strictly used for sneaking around. However, that does not mean that it's a useless ability. This move is really great for before you walk into a fight, especially if there's a lot of enemies around. It's very useful to be able to position yourself well before the enemies start to fight back. I tend to use this to get the drop on any faction bosses or any annoying enemies like drone specialists or the healing pigs. You can use this to sneak up on them and take them down first so you don't have to worry about them while you're in the middle of a fight. You can also use this ability if you start to get yourself in trouble. Using this move, you can give yourself a little bit of breathing room that you need to zip off to a perch so you're ready to mount another sneak attack or ambush attack. This is really great for getting around cameras and other detection devices. Some missions require you to disable things like cameras. With this, for a short period of time anyway, you can walk right through those surveillance devices and not have to worry about it. Long story short, while this move may not help you in combat per se, it can help you get into the perfect position before the battle starts, help you sneak back into the shadows if you're in trouble, and help you get around surveillance systems when needed. Next up is Robin's bow swing. Robin winds up and performs a wide, heavy swing with his bow staff, sending his target flying and knocking back any enemies in its path. You unlock this ability by completing the Ferocious Challenge. You gain access to this challenge during Case 3.2. This is when you first encounter the Feral Talons. You'll have to defeat 15 of them in order to complete this mission. Same as all the others, you're going to need to make sure that you're in an area that says it has a Court of Owls presence, and your best bet is premeditated crimes to find these enemies. That said, even smaller crimes in districts with the Court of Owls should have talons. This attack is one of Robin's simplest, but one of his best. First of all, it deals a really good amount of damage. It may not instantly take down any enemy, but if it doesn't, it'll at least take a good bite out of their health. And because of the area of attack, you'll hit multiple enemies. That makes this ability great for crowd control. Just make sure you're around as many enemies as possible, and you'll thin down at least the weaker ones. It also has that guard break aspect to it. So even if the larger enemies do have their guards up, this will break through, giving you an opportunity for a larger attack. And again, this one's influenced by whatever element Robin has equipped it to his melee weapon. The long story short here is this is a really great attack that causes a ton of damage, including elemental damage to a bunch of enemies, which works great for crowd control and taking a big bite out of larger enemies' health bars. Next, we're going to talk about Robin's Firework ability. Robin launches a combustible pellet that explodes into fireworks, inflicting elemental damage on enemies. This ability can be unlocked by finishing the In Plain Sight challenge, where you have to take out 5 League of Shadows assassins. This becomes available after mission 4.2. This is where you first encounter the League of Shadows assassins. To find assassins out in the world, make sure that you're in an area that has a League of Shadows presence. And you should be able to find them in both premeditated crimes and crimes of opportunity. This is one of my favorite attacks he has so far. Because this attack affects a full 360 degrees, it's really good for crowd control. It doesn't go out forever, but if you can gather a bunch of enemies pretty close, it'll affect everybody. Also, because it hits so many times, the damage really starts to add up. If you catch an enemy with this one, you can count on it getting multiple hits unless they're right on the edge of the attack radius. On top of that, while this attack is going, you're able to add up more damage on top of that with just your normal attacks. And once again, this attack is heavily influenced by Robin's elemental abilities. Whatever element you choose is going to rain down on your enemies, whether it be shock damage, fire, ice, or whatever else. As always, try and match this up with the enemy you're planning on taking on, and it'll make a huge difference. Long story short, this is an excellent attack when you're surrounded by enemies. It deals a solid amount of damage to a ton of enemies and really leans into the elemental effects. Next on our list is Robin's Wraith abilities. Robin triggers a holographic Wraith, automatically making nearby enemies afraid and spreading fear throughout the duration. While Wraith is activated, critical chance and critical damage increase by 15% and it lasts for 15 seconds. To get this ability, first you're going to have to finish Robin's personal story. To do this, you just have to go to these green symbols every time they pop up. Some of these you'll have to wait for the story to progress before they become available. These are all just cutscenes, so all you have to do is go to these locations and watch the cutscene and move on. After you've gotten all the cutscenes, you'll unlock the Microbot Expert Challenge where you'll have to take down 10 enemies with your Microbots. This really isn't too hard, especially if you decide to upgrade his nanobot ability with some of the knighthood skills, which we'll talk about later. So this attack is actually surprisingly good at clearing out enemies. The fear factor here is real. It can make any enemy run away, including the mini-bosses. And on top of that, you're doing more critical damage and have more chance of doing it. My advice is if you're looking for crowd control, just focus on hitting people and scaring them away. My bottom line here is if you need to take some pressure off, it's a great move to scare some enemies and do some extra damage while you're doing it. It may not be a move to hang your hat on, but if you have some extra momentum, it can sure be useful. Finally, we have his ultimate, the Microbots. Robin unleashes 3 swarms of Microbots that latch onto nearby enemies, dealing small amounts of incendiary damage, followed by an explosion. This lasts 10 seconds and has a cooldown of 10 minutes. You can get this one by completing your knighthood challenges. For that one, you'll just have to complete Time Strike training, stop 4 premeditated crimes, and defeat 3 faction mini-bosses. This one's a little different than the others because it's your ultimate. Instead of costing any momentum points, it has a cooldown of 10 minutes. This move is actually really good. You get these little Microbots that latch onto your enemies, dealing damage over time, but also paralyzes them while they're being attacked. You could also pair this with Incendiary, and they become literal balls of fire that get stuck to your enemies. So you're dealing some damage with this, but then your enemies are also stopped for you to deal even more damage. And then finally, they explode at the end, dealing even more damage. Like I mentioned before, this does have a few skills that can beef this up. First is the Microbots cooldown reduction. This reduces the Microbots cooldown 20%. Again, this is a pretty solid move, and one of the hardest things about your ultimate is it just takes time to use it again. So this really helps to get a little break there. The second is the Microbot Target Plus. With this one, Robin calls 2 more batches of Microbots, bringing you up to a total of 5. This is huge, especially for getting the Wraith ability. If you play your cards right, you can at least seriously damage, if not take down, 5 enemies at once. Bottom line here is this is a really great move that stops your enemies in their tracks, deals passive elemental damage, and then explodes at the end, and can be upgraded to hit even more enemies and have a faster cooldown time. Well, that's it. Thanks for watching till the end, and make sure to like and subscribe, and we'll see you again next time.